I've been hearing this theme of how learning is healing and healing is learning. And we need to have some compassion. It isn't like the UN is them and there's us. It's all of us. These are our institutions.
So I just add that, if government is part of the system, and it is, we're all agents in the system, whether we're in government or not. So we're all in a position to leverage power. And how you heal the system, not government system, the whole thing, is you connect it to more of itself. All healing is about connecting. Where I'm broken, I connect to more of myself. Whether that's you or your spirit, the natural environment, whatever. All healing is about connecting to more of ourselves. And so help connect up to government. Help connect government connecting up to the system is the way, is a key archetype of how to move this.
And just to let you know, there's two more people who have asked to speak after Paul and Roberta.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Is that okay? All right. I hope my voice is going to hang in here. I think Katie's question was a really powerful one that I think we really need to contemplate, because what I heard you asking, Katie, is really this much bigger question than just e-governance. It's really about how do we meaningfully involve young people in decision making at all levels of governance, and looking at technology maybe as an opportunity to do that. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if we're focused on technology, what are the spaces there that we need to?
Right.
Yeah. But really, what is the meaningfulness? Yeah.
Because I think this is the much bigger challenge before us in this conversation. I think there are real challenges in terms of the e-governance component, but I think the first priority is really engaging young people, and that's not easy, and governments have never had an easy time with that, and I think that's where we need to look at a system that begins respectfully and meaningfully with young people's day-to-day lived experience, and not just the young people that show up, but the young people that aren't showing up, or maybe even, and especially even the young people that are out there demonstrating, because that's another question that we need to ponder, is like, how do we manage now the frustration that's building up within our societies and the legitimate claims that young people are bringing forward, not always in a way that government's ready to listen to. I mean, Phil, you mentioned that sometimes when these messages get through the deep walls of penetration, when the window of opportunity does close or isn't there, it comes through in a very pointy way that governments don't, and civil servants and bureaucrats don't find easy, and with due respect to people like you, David, you're a wonderful emissary and representative from a system that is inherently not ready often to listen to young people. And I think this is a really challenging question before all of us. And I think we've learned a lot over the last 20 years. A lot of our work has been based in the Convention on the Rights of the Child and other human rights treaties that have attempted to bring young people into decision making and actually struggled with these and seen the challenges. But I think we've learned some lessons about, for example, how we organize ourselves in meetings in ways that often aren't very friendly to young people, and that if we're truly open to engaging young people in these processes, we need to go outside of our typical realms of how we think about citizenship and engage young people in very different ways in their communities, in their spaces where they live, maybe particularly with vulnerable youth out on the street or in communities where we feel quite uncomfortable. And I think if you can see that when this works, actually, it doesn't just benefit young people, it benefits all of us. And I think when we've seen where youth engagement works, it's not just about, and that is enough actually, that it does help youth, but it actually creates a much stronger sense of citizenship and democracy in all of our communities. I think another really interesting point of this discussion is that we're using the word governance, not government. And there's a really important distinction between those two things. Governance, for me, is something much broader that includes the hidden spaces of our society, that includes our non-formal kinship roots, the traditional governance systems in the communities in which we're working. In the Aboriginal communities where we're working, there's some really exciting governance work that's going on, which is about how do we build on these age-old traditions of making decisions, of resolving problems. There's some interesting learning happening from truth and reconciliation commissions around the world, which is one of these windows of opportunity, I think, where societies are literally blown up after these deep, intractable struggles, whether it's war, conflict, or civil tension, where there are opportunities for young people to come into debates around how decisions are made, not just on their specific issues about youth, but about whole societies that are being rebuilt. And I think we really need to look at these pockets of learning, and maybe this is my academic side showing up, but I think we really need to look at this notion of learning and where learning is happening, where the hotspots are, where the energy is in terms of learning in the systems in the world today. And that's a great place to use technology to share that learning. And I think, John, things like your map are really powerful. way of doing it. And maybe coming back to this notion of governance, see where some of these informal systems, which are quite innovative and are doing really good things, and many of them led by young people, can meld and bump up to and support governments and our civil servants in rethinking their approach to not just young people's engagement, but citizenship in general, particularly to drive that from the bottom up, I think. And that's a great place for the UN to get involved, because you are an intergovernmental organization, so your role, I think, for people like us and youth and others, is to be the ally who's helping government, sort of holding government by the hand to help them go down that road.
Okay, we got a couple questions. Gordon stepped in and promised a minute of provocation. Provocative question and statement for us.
Well, first of all, I apologize for not being here for the last hour. Maybe you already covered this, but I doubt it. But I had a call I absolutely had to make. What I wanted to do is, in talking about government, you're right, Philip, it's distinguished from governance. But government, it's to distinguish between, in my experience, the role of the bureaucracy and the role of politicians. Because my experience, which is Ottawa, is that the politicians do not want the bureaucrats going out there talking openly to youth or to anybody else. They don't want it to happen. I mean, if you're an ambassador abroad now, you've got to clear every speech you make with the Prime Minister's office. So, I think there's a problem that has to be addressed at the political level, and it's easy to kick the bureaucrats. I enjoy it myself, having been one. But it's not just the bureaucrats' problem, it's the politicians not wanting to let go, in my view.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe that's an interesting segue. Maybe recapping on some of the points, but just a little flavour from some of our experiences. And I want to build on what Sarah was talking about in terms of equipping people to engage. And also look at how you can both co-opt government in some of this process, in terms of being non-oppositional, but bringing government into a process of change, because it makes them look better, it helps them to spend their budgets better, and it also makes them more electable locally. And a lot of the experience we've had in some of the very local level advocacy work with young people and communities, which is more around social accountability, budget spend on a local level on basic services and entitlements, has led local governance to become better. Because it makes them look better, and it also engages young people and families and parents in the process of governance themselves. They take on responsibility to ensure that those services continue to run well. And so that mutuality in terms of how do you get resources to work, how do you get policies to work at a local level, I think is a really critical role to be played by your community-based organizations. And often you can bring in technology to this. In some places very difficult, but one of the very good examples that I've seen in being able to expose both poor use of resources as well as accountability in terms of, let's say, teacher attendance in school, where teachers are supposed to be at any given time in terms of how they're placed, where is the internal corruption in the ministry in terms of why people are placed in certain places for favors. There's a great example in Honduras for the Association for a More Just Society, have posted all of this information by gathering it at a grassroots level in a computer-based system that allows people to access this information locally, and then to be able to disseminate that through normal, let's say, traditional media, because not everybody has access to the smartphone, to a computer, to the internet, and so through radio, through newspapers, a lot of this information that's gathered and then made accessible to the public can then start to create greater accountability, both within government at a very high level, but also at a very local level. And so we've been trying to equip young people to have those skills, to engage in those processes as part of a citizen voice and action process. So co-opting, non-oppositional, bringing government to look better and to be able to function better, I think is something that can be very powerful.
Great. Roberta.
This goes back to some comments that you raised, David and Philip, and before about the sort of the censorship of roles online. And it's something that I struggle with the students that I have at Carleton University, and those people who are looking forward to moving into government positions or criminal justice agencies somehow, and how to sort of discuss with them the reality of developing a social media consciousness or lifestyle, but also recognizing that the agencies that they would like to apply for in the near future maybe don't embrace that as much as they would like, or if the message comes to the point where it's a little bit more hostile and not the way, it's not just a friendly, hey government, we should be doing this, it's more of a criticism or a critique of the way they're doing something, and having those discussions with young people about the consequences of that, being those pioneers almost in that realm, because they aren't seeing eye to eye yet. So if you're speaking out against, the way that the government is doing something now, before you become part of the government or part of a government agency or a public service agency, how does that impact your chances of then becoming a part of that agency? Not only law enforcement, but the rest of the agencies that do check online to see your online activity, are looking at what you're commenting on, are looking at your political views, and they're not quite at that state where they see that as somebody that's, wow, this is a critical thinker that may change the way we do things, is a, whoa, this is someone that's going to introduce something that we don't, that we're not ready for. So that preparing them and encouraging them, but also being realistic, is a challenge that I find.
Just say one comment to that. I just met with Meg Wheatley last week, and she gave me a great, Margaret Wheatley, who leadership in New Science, great quote, and I'm living by it, is proceed till apprehended.
Proceed until apprehended.
And then what?
Then what?
Yeah.
Alison, I want to check in with you. Anything you want to add there?
Well, there was a lot said. I'm sorry?
Just want you to know you're not forgotten. You're there on the screen.
Oh, I'm not forgotten. I guess I would just, I just have to add to the comments of what people have been saying. I think also when talking about the system and kind of, if people are having these collaborative processes, then how do we, that are really qualitative, how do we show them in quantitative ways? How do we make memes? How do we make messages in the short kind of attention span that people have today? And the thing that we found, I think that is really great, is this visualizing aspect. So in our work processes of working with communities, there's a process where we visualize the data and we visualize their own community assessment. So I think the visualization thing, yeah, this is an important thing to keep in mind from a millennial perspective, as well as just where I see people's media going towards. A novel isn't really going to, novels and long essays and things are harder for people to consume these days. And then the other thing, I would say that I guess as a young person, it's really interesting to be in this multi-generational room, because I do feel like the young people with their frustrations, and then, there's kind of a more like, perhaps an older and more professional kind of perspective that plays out from an activist way, and I see this again and again between the institutions and civil society, youth, and government like this. But the thing that I would say also is I think there's also kind of a commercial question that will come in. For example, like Facebook, we're all contributing to Facebook now. It's something that I feel people are owning, but they don't. This is Facebook, and this is a private corporation, not private anymore, now it's a public corporation, but still, all the same, this is not, we don't own that data anymore. So also I kind of wonder how that kind of more global perspective of connecting in a global way, and instead of being so connected to our governments and looking to our governments for answers, I think that's also important to keep in mind how the corporations are in this process and their relationships. And then the last thing I would say, and this is kind of a fine note, but I will use my usefulness as an excuse for it, is that, in regards to when we were talking about the mapping, the UN mapping, for example, and that, it's meant for disaster areas and et cetera like this. Certainly here we're not dealing with a disaster situation, we're dealing with a colonial situation. In a lot of frames, or an occupation, a military occupation, and this isn't a peace-building tool. So sometimes you find with the international agencies, the application of tools that aren't necessarily fitting to the situation, as well as the definition and looking at things. And there's a huge, locally there's a movement right now within the donor community, I would say, in particular to East Jerusalem, where it's changing now away from peace building and looking at the situation as this kind of a conflict. And so, anyway, so I think that how we are seeing the situation is also affecting the systems that we are building, and that's important to keep in mind and learn more about. So,
Yeah, no, in fact, Alison